should we start with the big event?
We could start with the big event,
Which
the
was?
Halifax explosion of 1917, which people in the Maritimes know as a catastrophic event, but perhaps people in the rest of Canada aren't quite as familiar with that. You know, there's been a lot of nonfiction and there's been some documentary stuff made about it and so on. But it really was, it was the largest man-made explosion before Hiroshima. And I have to say, you know, growing up in Halifax, I was always really, you could say, obsessed with it, because the rubble is still everywhere if you know where to look. In the area where I grew up, there is rubble that's still there. But basically, it happened when a munitions ship collided with a relief ship in the Halifax harbor, and there was this massive explosion which leveled half the city, the north end of the city, completely wiped out the city's infrastructure, industrial infrastructure, you know, killed 2,000 people, made 9,000 homeless, injured others in horrible ways, blinded many people from the flying glass, you know, and then at least 200 people went missing and were never accounted for. So it was catastrophic, and it would be today. After I began working on it, obviously 9/11 struck, and at that point the explosion had more, I guess you could say, significance for me, because again, for me, what's interesting about these disasters that happen, of course the explosion was different because it was a random thing, it was not contrived. You know, the evil of that is another thing altogether. But what to me is really remarkable is how people survive, and sometimes in such bizarre ways, miraculous ways. And perhaps even more remarkable is how people can recover, and life goes on, and they do rebuild their lives. And not that anything can ever be the same again, but they do, I think, achieve a level of normal. And so in my book, it begins, I mean, the explosion is at it's there, that's what triggers the story. But predominantly the events are taking place 50 years later. I want to catch up with those survivors, this particular family, and see where they are, how far they've come, and so on. So that's the essence of the story, and I wanted to catch up with them. Again, it's 50 years later, at a time, it's 1969, it's after the moon landing, it's after Woodstock, and it's flower power laughing, and all of that stuff that's so, in many ways, you know, the flower power era and all that stuff, from my point of view, because I was too young to really engage with it. So I think it's really funny. I don't have the same, oh man, it was a really heavy time, a lot of heavy, great stuff went down. Then I just have sort of the, you know, the pop culture memories of it. And so I thought, that's a good time to pick them up again. And of course, the main character in the book, Lucy, is 71 when we meet up with her again. And so she's way too old to be involved in anything counterculture, and she's a darn good observer of all this stuff. And so it's a good time frame, I think, to catch up with them.
The explosion also coincides with the birth of her child. Her second child.
Yes.
Tell me about the first one.
The first child is lost in the explosion. They are never able to find a body. They put out ads in the newspaper, as people did then, the classified ads. You can still see them at the archives of people just desperately searching for their lost family members.
Kind of like those posters people put up at 9/11.
Yes, absolutely, yes, absolutely. And they ran them, you know, for months afterwards. So, and everyone would only have so many column inches, right? So little tiny ads. And so they put an ad in the paper to they're desperate. They cannot accept that this child is gone. And meanwhile, Lucy is expecting her second child, so she gives birth prematurely the next day after the explosion when a massive blizzard hit the city. So she gives birth in a tent on the Halifax Commons, and you know, and she is so shocked and shell-shocked by what's happened that she can't even really acknowledge what's happened to her. She can't even quite grasp that she's lost this first child, and she's had this baby, and she's completely disoriented.
Tell me about Harry.
Harry means well. He's a young
That's a very
dad.
good description of him.
He's a young dad. he has the opposite take on things. And especially after living through this horrific thing, he thinks, live for today, because you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and I'm just going to have fun. And that's what he's bent on doing. So, you know, he's a bit of a drinker. He plays poker a lot, and he's also involved in a little bit of contraband, which is rum running in that era, because Prohibition was in full effect in the Maritimes at that point. So, he's not exactly the great person to have as a partner.
And in 50 years later, in 1969, he has a stroke he has.
He does. He has a massive stroke. And so Lucy, and you see, after the explosion, she loses him for a day, and then she does find him. He's been blinded in one eye, of course, and so when he has the stroke, it's like, oh, here we go again. I'm losing him again. And it's kind of a repeat of that same process.
There are really two disasters that the book, with the two strands.
Yes.
Harry's stroke and the explosion.
Yes.
And we run through how they survive both. And they do survive. I mean, because people do.
Mm-hmm. They don't really have much choice, do they? If you're not dead, what do? You pick yourself up and you keep on going.
The book is Glass Voices. I've been speaking with the author, Carol Bruneau, and Glass Voices, published by Cormorant Books.